Well, you got a blank screen. Let's get that. Oh, there you are. I don't even know where to be. Welcome everybody to Overtime. This is not overtime. Yeah, we just did that. No, this is off time. This is where, like, I can't even read the script. It's like, in happy, jubilant voice, say, "Welcome to Off Time." Wow. I don't even know what to think. I'm having a hard time processing. We were. Well, you were great. You know, you hit me up and you're like, look, a lot's going on. If you want to postpone the show, I was like, no, I do not want to postpone the show. I am not going to talk about news. We're going to sit here. We're going to shoot the shit. And then Trump's got nuclear secrets. Trump.
No, I think you're overstating the case. You know, the fact that he's giving away nuclear secrets is not as serious as people are making out. It doesn't matter that we could get nuked out of existence as long as he's making bank on it. That's what's important.
My bad. Exactly. Well, and I just like, okay, Donnie boy, and we actually had on my website. We did do a poll because I refused to call him president, and now I've gotten so I can sort of, now that he's out of office. But I said I wasn't going to call him president. I refused to do that, and so I said we have to find an honorific. I do respect the office, so he has to have something, So what title do we give him? And we voted, and on my website, and we go Pussy Grabber in Chief was the appropriate. So, but, if you could just, I'd like to have a little bit of a break. And I told my wife about this, and she was just like, yeah, and I see her point, and we talked about it. Part of me is thinking that this really should be on the cover of the New York Times tomorrow. And we made it clear in the show that we just did that you have to understand we do have a couple of facts, and they overlap dramatically, but they do not create a proof that, but it's close, which is we know really, and I think that's assuming you find Washington Post credible, and I do. We know that, and it explains a lot, and we'll get into that, but we know that the search warrant included the search for documents related to the U.S. nuclear program or to strategery or something, which I'm sure you'll explain. You already did, and I still don't have it. But okay. We know that was part of the search. We believe that there were other things in the search, but we know that was one of the things that they were looking for was nuclear documents. We also know that they found a number of the things that they were looking for. That is not a proof that they found documents from the U.S. nuclear program in Mar-a-Lago, but it strongly suggests it. And when you take into account the fact that they, okay, now I really do want to know why I'm getting pings here, and I haven't figured that out. I'm going to have to look into that. It does strongly suggest it, and when you take a look at sort of how this was done and who's involved in it, it appears like that. There's a very good reason to suspect that was a huge chunk of why they were doing this. So what I do want to point out before we go any further, and I was just like, oh, let's talk. Last time you and I talked, we talked about dogs, which I really want to get into. I used to hate dogs as a kid. It turned out I hated the dog owners. The dogs were great, but I think I'm just like, I think this casual conversation thing for tonight may kind of go out the window because I'm not having you on and I'm going to pick your brain about this, and my suspicion is you're going to want to chat about it too. So,
that's fine.
Okay, I'm I'm getting a large number of pings coming in, and I'm honestly haven't figured out how or where they're coming from. So I'm gonna have to take a look at them. But the biggie, and I observed this, and nobody mentioned this. So we got yesterday. All right, I do need to sort of figure out why that's because that's going to make it very difficult for me to continue if I don't find the source of those pings. Somebody's trying to get a hold of me. well, first of all, I mentioned, my wife was just like, look, is anybody going to really do anything about this? And I've always said in the past, well, sure, they'll get him on the money laundering because Deutsche Bank, it's pretty clear. Nope. They'll get him on the Rush. Nope. And he's been bulletproof. This is the most serious thing, in my view, that he's been accused of. And I'm sitting there going like, is this, what's it going to take? But for those of you who haven't been paying attention to the nuance, and we're going to assume that you have some idea of what's going on. And if you don't, you can join our Discord, and I'm sure we'll hash it out. But the Justice Department moved to unseal the warrant for Mar-a-Lago. Now, one of the reasons that they did this ostensibly is because there's been threats of violence, significant threats of violence. There's been some protests over this, and they want to sort of head it off at the pass. And stand by one. They want to head it off at the pass, and all right. They want to head it off at the pass, and they want to try to show people what it is. Now, Trump is, of course, innocent, which is why he... just kidding. The Trump team apparently is preparing to try to block that. He also pleaded the fifth 440 times yesterday in his deposition in New York. But I was looking at the motion to unseal the warrant.
I recall a great man once saying, a guy who pleads the fifth is obviously guilty. Who would that have been that said that?
I don't know. I don't.
He had an artificial tan and kind of strawberry blonde dyed hair. I can't remember the name. Who was it? Gosh,
I
just
don't.
On the tip of my tongue.
We do have a bunch of researchers working for us. If somebody could look that up and find that out for us, that would be great. But yeah, somebody who just said only guilty people plead the fifth. We'll get on that. Ed, by the way, he's the one who signed the law that says for mishandling documents you can't run for public, you can't actually hold public office again. He signed that. So I'd say that that's going to do it for him. But frankly, nothing has so far. So we'll see. But
don't call him the Teflon Don for no reason.
I know, Jesus. I'm really okay. Look, I'm starting to think that he's basically Jesus, because at this point, of course, Jesus got
if you look into Christian philosophy, there's the other side of that equation. My opinion would be that might be a more appropriate analogy, but I'm not going to dispute it with you.
His family owns 666 Madison Ave. I ain't making that up.
There you
go. I wish I was making it up. Kushner owns it. All right. So the document to unseal the warrant. What I noticed about it when I was reading it was the signatures. We had Juan Antonio Gonzalez, who is a U.S. state's attorney, and we had let's see. I think we had somebody else. I could have sworn we had at least one other. But the biggie that stood out was J.I. Bratt, who, as it turns out, is the chief of counterintelligence at the National Security Division of the Justice Department. That's not a small name. And I'm sitting there going, why is he signing off on this? He's got no business signing off on this unless his name is on the original warrant, which means his name is on the original warrant. That's why he's signing off on this. In what capacity, we don't know. Is he, saying that here's where we have the evidence? Is he part of the request? I don't know, but he has interest in this. So that's, in my view, extraordinarily staggering. And then about an hour and a half ago, maybe a little less, Washington Post said that included in the search warrant was documents, nuclear documents. And you had explained that to me earlier. Would you mind explaining to me what that means? Because to me, that's like, he did. Remember when he gave the launch codes to that 7-year-old kid? Because that was a riot. But
so the launch codes are held in very close two-person integrity kind of security. The the idea that he might have access to that after he left office it stretches credulity enormously.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are lots of other documents, not launch codes themselves, but what we would call SIOP planning documents, SIOP, Strategic Integrated Operational Plan, which discusses things like targeting, flight times, destructiveness of the various warheads allocated to certain targets, different target priorities, that kind of stuff. Really key and critical information about if nuclear war occurs, what our plan to conduct said war is.
Jesus. So presumably what he had at his home in Mar-a-Lago would be along those lines, presumably.
That would be my surmise, yes.
I saw you shaking your head, but I'm going to ask anyway.
Well, yeah.
Or I saw you nodding. I'm going to ask anyway. When I say that this is the worst thing that he's been accused of, and we don't have the details, it's presumably going to get fleshed out. But so far, it strikes me maybe even an order of magnitude worse than any of the things that he's been. I shouldn't say order of magnitude. It is qualitatively different than what he's been accused of so far, in my view. Is that yes? Yeah.
But I would also ask you this, and this switches us from a question of what we actually know and moves into the world of speculation. My question for you is, if that's the case, if he has documents pertaining to the PSYOP or other issues of that, of that magnitude, why does he have them? What possible use could he have had for wanting to remove those documents from the White House? I mean, I can understand taking other things, even if they're classified, because, I'm going to write my memoirs and I want to make sure I have reference material to all the brilliant things I did or whatever. That's fine and dandy. But what the hell do you need with documents pertaining to nuclear war planning?
Yeah, that was a question.
And you know where I'm going with this.
I know where you're going with this.
The only thing, literally the only thing I can come up with is he intended to auction them off to the highest bidder. Or he's using them as insurance of, if you go after me, then I'm going to give this to our enemies. Either of those two possibilities is pretty awful.
I detest
and as you
the guy.
said, it's a magnitude higher than anything else we've seen coming out of this.
I detest the guy, and I find it difficult to actually say that. That's where my head went. Now I remember when, and I enjoy research. I enjoy studying things, and that's one of the reasons, natural fit for this show. But I remember when he was first running and all the hubbub came up about Trump University. And so I said, okay, fuck this. I don't know how to tell who's telling the truth. And I got my biases, but I don't know. So I just got the manual for Trump University. It was the manual that they gave to all their quote professors and all this other stuff. And it didn't take long reading it before I was like, okay, this is a scam. And they're all but saying it's a scam. And it's not talking about policies, academic policies, how to educate, what are best practices. It doesn't talk about anything except how to divorce people from their money. And it said, okay, if somebody says that they can't afford the next seminar on land deals, you remind them that they can't afford not to do it. And here's how you sell, and I forget what the various sales techniques were, but it was clearly various sales techniques to try to, and upselling like crazy. And then how to have people actually mortgage their properties so that they can take the next class. And I was like, okay, I've been in academia most of my life. I've never seen an academic document that reads like this. It is a scam, period. End of discussion. And I'd say this to people who were supporters. And I said, could you do me a favor and just read it? You're a conservative, right? That means you got that horse sense. You're into business. Read the fucking document and tell me a single business you've ever seen that works this way, except for one that's scamming people. And they're like, yeah, I'll read it if I get the time. I was like, no, don't take my word for it. And so from then on, how he operates became very clear to me. And I've had that in my mind ever since. And he's an idiot, which is one reason why I've not always been as worried about it. Now, keep in mind, that was the general consensus on Adolf. One of the reasons he was as easily electable as he was because it was like, well, he's so dumb, he's not going to be able to pull one over on us. And, well, so you said exactly what I'm thinking, but it's still very hard to think that he went that far.
I think you have to look at his past record. Everything he has ever done has been a scam oriented to enriching himself. The number of people who have, his fervent backers who do stuff that he defrauds, that he won't pay until he can coerce them into decreasing the amount that he previously agreed on because he's, threatening by saying, well, you either take the 40% I'm offering you or we'll go to court and it'll be tied up for decades and you're not going to get a damn thing. So, that's the kind of person he is. Yep. That's the way he operates. Now, some people say that's just goodness, good business sense or whatever. I'd call it at best unethical, if not illegal, but whatever. But if you look at that as the precedent for where we are now, I don't see how you can arrive at any other possible conclusion of what's going on here. I mean, I'd love to hear somebody give me an alternate scenario. I really would.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, take a look at the totality. I can't reach any other conclusion. It's just a little mind-boggling. I can't. I'm actually engaged right now in an argument on Twitter over whether I'm an optimist or a cynic, and I don't know.
Can't you be both?
Well, I guess that's what we're learning. I'm cynical about my optimism. I guess maybe I don't know, but
optimistic about your cynicism.
I'm very optimistic about my cynicism. That is, yes, I am optimistic. I like that. There you go. Well, somebody was just like, Nick, I think you need to be more positive. I was like, oh, I'm positive. I'm a cynic. But it's still, it's tough to imagine anyone being that stupid. Having said that, dogs. You and I were talking about dog training. And a part of that is what are called corrections, which people who don't understand training, they mistake for, they mistake a correction for punishment. And they're very different things. They look similar. They are used sometimes in similar ways, but they're not the same thing. And if a dog doesn't receive corrections, what you're actually doing is implicitly telling it that what it's doing is okay. And this happens with all mammals. It's not just dogs in particular, but human beings too. And when you're raising children, I talked about that. It's a little weird, but you know what? It's actually, there's a lot of less. I'm a better dad because of learning to train dogs. And once I realized you don't put the invisible fence collar on the kids, that was an improvement. Okay, so mistakes were made. Mistakes were made. Just Reagan just like he hit that one out of the park. So we'll use the passive. Mistakes were made, but I look at Trump, and it's a litany of getting away with everything, and every time you do, that teaches you that what you did was okay.
You can get away with it.
even if intellectually you know that there's laws against it or this or that, we all know some laws are completely bogus. Everybody, for the most part, speeds. We jaywalk, we do any number of things. Most of the time, we get away with just this sort of wash of, whatever. But, we all know there's a line somewhere. Most of us know there's a line somewhere. And Trump appears to think that they're all laws are jaywalking. And
I don't think so. I think what it really is in his case is that he's of that class where they firmly believe, and the legal system has pretty much borne this out, that laws don't apply to them. Yeah. That they can do whatever they want, and if they are called to account between their connections, their money that they can use under the table to influence things, and the way the legal system in this country works, they won't ever be punished for wrongdoing. And we've basically not just entrenched that into the system, but we've raised it to the gold standard. It's the Pledge of Allegiance right above the blackboard in school. It's that they, the rich man is never held accountable. And I think that's part of what's going on with him. I'll give you one ridiculous example.
It would be hard to, if we're going to talk about Trump, it's hard to come up with a non-ridiculous one, but please.
Yeah. But I'm not talking specifically about Trump. I'm talking about the system. Martha Stewart gets called out for insider trading. Martha Stewart ends up going to prison for, 18 months or something. We all know, and we've seen them being called to account and getting, at best, slaps on the wrist, all these very rich white males, and they never get held to account for insider trading. At best, they're, don't do it again, and you have to pay this token fine. You can still keep the billions of dollars you made in profits off of it, pay the court cost or something small like that. We'll let you know that we're mad. And that's the way the system works. We've entrenched, raised it to the gold standard. It is the tablet that Moses brought down off of the founding fathers' mount, that the rich white man is not in the same category with everybody else. And the tragedy of American politics is that we've somehow managed, or they have somehow managed, to convince all the little guys that are not the rich white man, but are just white men, that holds true for them as well. So they dutifully, oh yes, we will vote for that ticket because I'm going to be one of those great men who can't be held to account. And they don't understand what complete and utter patsies they are for falling for that bullshit. Anyway, I'll get down off my soapbox. You may speak now.
Well, well, I was thinking too. The other thing is, the common excuse that's given, and this was 2008, the Wall Street collapse. I think one banker went to jail. One banker, the entire thing, and it's like, well, okay, it's not a violent crime. That's half true. It's not a violent crime, but it's hard to imagine. If somebody came up to me and said, well, I could, commit a violent crime of some kind, you're going to get punched or kicked, maybe, whatever. Or I'm going to take your house from you and your kids will be penniless, homeless, and all of these other things. I'll take the violent crime. I will. There's a number of violent crimes I would greatly prefer to the non-violent ones of that magnitude. And when you throw a family out into the street, that kind of feels like a violent crime to me. They're forcibly being removed from. If they try to stay in their homes, it'll become a violent crime. The police will come and kick. So this idea that it's not a violent crime is very strange to me. I get it in principle. You kind of look at it and say, oh, it's about money. But it's like, well, money, food, water, money gets both of those things pretty well. Shelter, it's up there in terms of crimes. But it's
we're moving past what's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You want shelter, you want health, you want food, you want safety. All of that is what you and I and people in our and lower socioeconomic strata worry about. But when you get into that economic strata, the only thing you're worried about is, it's not even, can I afford another $1 billion yacht this month? It's, where am I going to hide all of this money so I don't get taxed on it? And, so much of the social safety net of this country is compromised in large part because so much of the wealth that should be going to maintaining that and keeping us all living better lives is just being secreted in offshore accounts for people who couldn't spend it, or their great-great-grandchildren couldn't spend it in their lifetimes if they were spending as much as they could every goddamn day.
Yep. Which actually is Andrew.
As my son just muttered from the background, oh, but that's controversial.
Yeah, well, what is this? I love controversial. We're going to be doing a show on Tuesday. We're supposed to do it this Tuesday, but I'm like, I've had a hard time sort of getting back into things since vacation. It was a great vacation, but my brain is still in neutral. And I wanted to do more research for this, but we're doing one on the so-called fair tax, and I've been looking at that for a while now, and I can't find any serious drawbacks with that. I don't know how familiar you are with it. I don't want to cover too much now because we're going to do a big thing on that Friday. But it would revolutionize taxes, and in a very positive way. We talk about revolutionizing taxes. Usually, what that means is we add a lot more to the tax code. This would reduce the tax code by 90%. Make it very easy to understand, and you'd probably never have to deal with the IRS ever again in your life. I somehow that dovetailed with what you were talking about people hiding money. But I'd asked you a question a while back, listen, I'm a writer, so I tell everything in stories. So everyone just has to, I'm on my platform, and I'm not going to shut up as I talk, or people are going to have to listen as I talk about my old man. But a prison psychologist came to a writer's workshop I had once, and he wanted to write a book, and threw all these stories down, and people were looking at these stories, and they said, this can't be real. None of this can be real. And I took one look at it. I said, all of this is completely real. This is completely real. And the way I know is because my father was a criminal defense attorney. And the stories that he told me as a kid, I was just like, well, that can't be right. That can't be right. And then you learn and you see it, and you're like, it's a madhouse. It's all of its utter insanity. And he was a psychologist at Walpole Maximum Security, which I knew because my father had clients worked there, which was an interesting thing. But I took one look at it, and it had verisimilitude to me because I was like, yeah, this is how the system works. This is really how the system works. The Steele dossier was actually, it was originally opposition research that the Republican Party was doing on its own candidates. And opposition research is reasonably frequent. And what's his name? Steele was the head of the RNC, and he had collected this dossier. Now, it got leaked to the Democrats, and the Democrats eventually released it. Everyone's like, oh my God, the Democrats did this terrible thing by doing this research. It's like, oh, this is all Republican research. But that notwithstanding, now this is the PP tape one, right? And what they basically said was Trump hired some hookers. They were peeing on him in a hotel in Moscow, and they had all these things. And I took one look at this, and I said, this sounds plausible. And everybody else said, this is the most insane thing that I've ever heard. And I was just like, well, look, you take a look at Epstein. Nobody knew who he was then. But we've all seen people high up who are rich and famous who do really crazy, stupid things. And on the list of the craziest things I've ever heard that a celebrity has done, the top 20 are all illegal, and none of them are that. So I'm like, look, he's got a tremendous amount of money. He's paying hookers to pee on him. He's not the first guy to have thought of that. So yeah, hugely embarrassing. But I take a look at...
Technically speaking, they weren't peeing on him. They were peeing on a bed that the Clintons had slept in. That was what was going on.
I had forgot. Thank you for the correction. Let it never be said that we gave out misinformation. So thank you for the correction. Peeing on the bed. Now I believe it even more, quite frankly, because that is just...
Because it's so much more absurd.
No, it's him. It's him. It's just him. We all know. But at any rate, so many people were sitting there saying that it was absurd, and I was just like, no, I take one look at this. The guy who did it was MI6. MI6 knows what the fuck they're doing. Are there some loonies in MI6? Well, we had a loony as president of the United States, so it's certainly possible. But having said that, if this guy's been around, he knows how to find the truth. He knows what this is going to look like to an outsider, but he's putting his reputation on some level, and he's retired, but he's still, I was like, so, and then I just read this, and I was like, yeah, this is how life works. I mean, this is how life works, and he described how Putin would have gone about trying to get this intelligence in a way that made sense to me. So my question to you was, did it look reasonable to you? And so I'll ask you again, what were your thoughts on that dossier?
What I know of it, I think is reasonably accurate. I can't say conclusively that we know the truth of it. I won't say that the PP tape is or isn't real, but I can guarantee you that that's the kind of thing that the then KGB, currently FSB, do. Is all those hotels, particularly the big fancy ones that, captains of industry and diplomats and such stay at, literally every room is bugged for camera and sound fully. And anything that happens in that room is recorded. And they hold that information to use as leverage. It's not even, it's hard to express it. Compromat is not blackmail, although it has a lot of similarities. But the idea is that you merely imply that this compromising information exists, and you let the individual's mind play on itself to give you what you want. Now, yeah, it's a lot nicer if you have it and you can, flop it on the table and say, oh, look, compromising photographs. But you can actually, through the use of fear and suspicion and doubt, create an even bigger leverage mechanism against your target. And yeah, at the time, he may not, have been a presidential candidate or something when he did that. But the key is that he was a person of interest. And all they're trying to do in any intelligence service, and this is not just them, but the CIA, MI6, MI5, whoever, the French security, any big nation security. That's what you do, is you find people that potentially can be useful to you, either because they know information that you want, they know somebody who has that information, they're simply a person of influence, so they can introduce you to people that you want to meet, that kind of stuff. So, were he to have gone to Russia and stayed in some fancy hotel, anything that transpired in that room, they've got tape of it.
Well, and we know he did. We know he did more than one, so we know that, if I recall, it was a part, at least one of them was at Putin's behest well before. So he was known to Putin before he even started running. And looking backwards, this looks like virtually impossible. It's like, oh, okay, so they happened to bug his room, they got his. But the way they look at it, if I understand this correctly, is, in their view, they cultivate 10 leads for people who might have influence somewhere in the U.S. And if even one of them pans out, they're like, hey, victory done, we got the one. And then you sit there and say, well, how'd they pick this one? No, they didn't. They're throwing spaghetti against the wall, whichever one sticks.
Yeah,
like,
it literally, anybody who shows up, you sign somebody to it. If it's somebody you think might be useful because they're influential, well-known politician, military officer, what have you, you assign more than one person to track them and do stuff with them. But yeah, I mean, did you or I show up and go to a hotel in Russia, there's a better than even chance that there's something going on that's monitoring everything that we say and do. I'll give you one example, and this is not specific to what we're talking about, but it shows the kind of mentality that the Russian mind works on. Mm-hmm. Is in the Soviet era, the Russians built a big, fancy, super well-appointed apartment complex near the Kremlin. And it was for all the high-ranking members of the Politburo, Soviet industry, what have you. Anybody who was big and had to be in Russia or in Moscow, they were given apartments in this building. The KGB was the one who built the building.
Jesus.
And literally every room not only had camera access and listening devices placed in it, every phone was tapped, etc. There were also hidden secret passages that gave you access to every single apartment in the building.
Jesus.
So if they wanted to remove you quietly at 2 a.m. when everybody was asleep, they just came in the back door, so to speak. If you were out and they wanted to see if you had documents that you weren't supposed to have or plant documents that you shouldn't have had, they could do it. And that mentality pre-exists the Soviet era, because the Cheka, is the one that started it for them. But prior to that, the Okhrana, which was the Tsarist secret police, did the same kind of thing. And today, they're still carrying that out. Russia is a society that monitors everybody all the time. It's difficult to do it now because it's a semi-free society, but those are just trappings. But if you're anybody of interest to the state, yeah, you can guarantee that they're watching you very closely.
Well, that's where Orwell got most of his ideas from. I mean, it was a critique of Stalin, really, and you can see photos of Stalin both before and after. Stalin's sitting there hanging with a guy, and then all of a sudden the guy's not in the photo, and it's like, and it's actually
there's a great book, and what is it? I think it's The Missing Commissar or something, and it takes all of these pictures from the Bolshevik and Soviet eras. And it shows you the different iterations of those photos. And it's the exact same photo where they've very carefully photoshopped out, well before Photoshop, of course, people from photos, or moved people to different positions in photos because where you were relative to Lenin or Stalin was almost as important as whether you were in the photo or not. And it's this whole ridiculous thing. But the part that to me was mind-boggling wasn't that they did that. We knew that was going on. It was that people who had copies of books in which these photos were published. So, pictures of the glorious 14th People's Congress or whatever, and they'd send out the album. If they doctored a photo, they had a list of everybody that owned the book, and they would mail them
a
copy of the new photo that they were to paste over the old photo in the book, because this was the new truth, and only one truth will ever exist. It is the party's truth.
Yeah, and I've heard all this and I've read it, and we talked. I'd been in Russia too, and that was an experience. It was the Soviet Union at the time. I almost got shot on the way out too, which was misunderstanding.
That's fun.
Yeah, well, it was okay. Short story. I failed to bribe a customs official, which I really is not how I would have thought. And I knew everybody bribes everybody over there. It's everything's a bribe. I was leaving and I brought rubles with me because I was like, oh, rubles are really pretty. We just have the greenbacks, and I was like, here's a really different currency. And I brought the rubles with me. Turns out you're not allowed to leave the country with rubles. Just not. I declared them. It says, do you have any Russian currency? I said yes, because I didn't realize you're not supposed to leave. And so I get to I sort of crossed the line, and the line was just basically was like a rope thing. And I crossed the line, and I'm basically I'm in Russia, and then I'm in kind of like international, I think. And I'm talking to the guy, and he says, he reads this, he goes, do you have the Russian currency? I said, yes. So could you take it out, please? I said, sure. I pull it out of my wallet, and boom, there it is. He goes, you're not allowed to leave the country with this. I was like, what? He's like, you're not allowed to leave the country with this. I was just like, oh, well, what do I do? I've already crossed the line. He's like, I don't know. And it's like, I'm just like, it was so obvious he was looking for a bribe. Other people in my party
slip me 20 and you can walk out with as much of the rubles you want.
I could have done it with a 1. I mean, at that point, the dollar was trading to 300 rubles. I could have done it with a single dollar. That would have been easily, that would have been as much as they make in a year. And I had it. It was so ingrained in me, you don't bribe a customs official. I just and there was somebody else in my party who did, but she paid too much. Yeah.
Yeah. I won't mention the country, but traveling overseas as we did, when we moved to this particular country and our household goods were being shipped in, my father was given by the embassy a list of, here are the officials you need to go see, and here's how much you need to give them. And that was in order to get your household goods released so you could take them and go put them in your apartment. And this was the fee that you have to pay. This was very quietly and discreetly hand him the envelope under the table, because that's how he makes his living, because the amount that the government pays him is a trifle. So he makes his living basically on taking bribes.
I think I told you that my first girlfriend, serious girlfriend, was from Argentina, and I'm talking to her on the phone once, and we had gotten so we could talk to each other pretty candidly. And she goes, I've been wanting to ask people this, but I didn't know how to ask them, so I'm going to ask you. How much do you bribe officers here? I was like, whoa there, doggers. I was like, no, you don't bribe. You don't bribe officials. You don't bribe police officers in the U.S. She goes, well, no, I'm not saying for big things. I'm just saying, like, if you get pulled over, how much do I give them? And I was just like, no, what we have here is a real bad failure to communicate. Like, you do not suggest, do not offer, do not even accidentally drop a bill in front of a police officer in the United States. And she got pissed. She's like, I thought we had a relationship. You could be honest with me. And I was just like, no, I was like, no, please, let's not, let's not argue over this. But, and she finally asked around. She came back. She goes, wow, you were telling the truth. I was like, yeah, I was telling the truth. It's not to say it hasn't been done.
It's amazing how Americans and foreigners don't understand that difference. Is that overseas, it's normal. It's the convention. Everybody understands that's the way business is done. And in this country, you even suggest it to the wrong person, and bad things will happen.
Yeah. Well, so this guy clearly wanted to be bribed, and I remember thinking afterwards, I was like, oh, maybe that's what turning his head and looking away, saying, I don't know, maybe that means $1 needs to end up on the thing in front of him. But I didn't think that. I'm 16 or whatever, so I said, okay. I'm just going to hand these back to a buddy of mine, and figured she'd cross with them, which even when they saw me do it, and she still crossed with them, so I got the money back, but I figure I'll go to her, so I run over, my arm crosses the line back into Russia, I hand her the money, I then run back to the customs agent. All the guards around, and they are like they're up like 2 stories on these they all they see is me reaching over and what looks like grabbing something from there and running back. So all of a sudden, all these AK-47s are like, I was like, he's 𝗲𝗎𝐴, he's 𝗲𝗎𝐴, just like, and the customs agent, to his credit, jumped out and was just like, it's a dumb American, let him, he's okay. It's just like, it was, I'll remember it for the rest of my life. Yeah, so I tell people I almost died because I failed to bribe the customs official, and in America it's like, ha ha ha. It's like, no, I'm serious. It's like, so yeah, there's a lot of differences in the culture, and we talked about the lying thing too, which I think is we should get into at some point, but. It's very hard, and then when they come out, so when they come out of that culture and they lie to everybody about everything. And I've been called like racist for saying that, which of course they're not a race, so I'd be nationalist, I guess, but bigoted. But I've said, when you meet Russians who come out of that culture, and it's a generational thing, and I remember being there, and they would lie about everything. It didn't matter. I one time was talking to somebody I'd met there, and we had become friends. He said, "Oh yeah, it was raining earlier today, and this and this." And I was just like, it was only like 10 a.m. in the morning. It hadn't rained in 3 days. I was like, why did he just drop that into the story? It's like, it's not raining. It wasn't raining. And I started to call him out on it because it was so funny. And he got really kind of. He later got pissed off about it. Right then he was just dismissive. He goes, I don't know what, of course it was raining. It was just like, and he was just like, why do you care? And I was just like, because you guys lie about everything, even shit you don't have to, you just throw it in there. Yep. But if I lived with a secret police and your best friend could turn you in for anything, the most plausible deniability is everything's a lie to everybody all the time. And it was bizarre. It was another world, and I think I told you this one too. But my wife and I, we were in line at we were getting clothing, and she had a whole bunch of coupons, but you couldn't use a whole bunch of the coupons together. The woman behind us was Russian, so my wife says to her, we've got some extra coupons. Would you like them? And she goes, I don't know, speak English. And my wife, I think just to show her up, because my wife was like, okay, fine. She goes, hon, could you? And so I was like, I speak Russian, so I offer her the coupons. Immediately, in basically perfect English, she goes, no, thank you very much. I don't need them, but I appreciate the offer. I was like, she thinks I'm either U.S. like intelligence or a double agent. Like I was like, yeah, because I'm an American who speaks Russian. Of course she thinks that. And she was, but she's going to be like a little more honest with me, show deference, and start speaking English. I was like, oh.
Yes, but I will point out that mentality cuts both ways. My father recounts a case. Now, my father he speaks fairly decent Russian now, but he used to speak it almost fluently. And again, we're talking about a man whose career was working at a 3-letter agency targeting foreign nationals. And he was in a department specifically targeting Russians. The number of people in the agency who called him a communist because he could speak Russian would boggle your mind. Now, think about that.
I heard the same thing happen. I was thinking of learning either Farsi or Arabic for obvious reasons. And I learned Russian in high school of my own initiative. I started taking college classes in Russian. And I said to myself, one of two things is true. Either my government is telling me the truth, in which case they're our enemy, and I'd kind of like to know the language so that I know what they're saying, or they're our friends and that my government's lying to me, which is also completely plausible. In which case, I want to know the language so I don't have to get it from my government who's lying to me. Either way, I wanted to learn Russian. So I was thinking of learning Farsi and or Arabic for the same reason, especially around 9/11. But I had heard that they were having troubles because, first of all, they were trying to recruit people who spoke those languages into the CIA. But even within that, there was this immense hostility towards people who had already learned the language. Sort of like, why'd you learn it on your own before 9/11 happened? You know, what are you?
Comrade.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. Well, that was my high school career. There was this one kid who'd come up to me. Oh, Nick, how's the motherland? I was like, dude. It's like, okay. Yeah. So. It seems plausible, and I got to tell you, if I hadn't have known anything from the Steele dossier, if I hadn't have heard any of that, if I hadn't have heard any of the rumors, if I didn't know how Russia operated, if I didn't know any of those things, I would still be, as an American, rather offended at the way Trump bent over for Putin time and time again, publicly extolled this man who has killed Putin. I say this every time just to be crystal clear, has murdered people with his bare hands. He was an assassin for the KGB. I'm not using metaphor. I'm not saying he's killed. And it takes a special, it takes a lot of training, and it takes a certain kind of fortitude to be able to kill people with a weapon, to be able to go into the military and learn how to do it and defend this country. That takes fortitude in and of itself. To go up and do it with your bare hands and strangle the life out of someone, and do that just because that's the job that most appeals to you. That's Putin. And to hear the way Trump was just like, well, our intelligence agencies are saying that he's doing all these terrible things, but I believe him. To say that publicly. So I would have thought at that point somebody's got something on him or he's unhinged. And those aren't mutually exclusive propositions, by the way. So if you opine on one.
I think it's a combination.
So you had said, and I just realized we're having this conversation, some of this was stuff that we had said. You've said stuff similar before on air. So if we're moving into a territory you don't want to discuss on air, let me know. I didn't sit there and say I was going to bring up all this stuff, but I found your views on this fascinating. But you had said that you thought he would go down as the most successful spy master in human history. Yeah. So, and in large part, and this is and we had talked about this during the revolution thing, which is he's I've heard this before. I don't like to just sort of parrot back what I hear, especially when it comes from elements of my own government, but sure. That he was devastated by the failure of the Soviet Union. He was a member of the KGB. He presumably thought his country would go on forever, just like we do. And sure. They were broken up. And it was in a large part by a deliberate attempt by the U.S. to break them up, to break them financially. And that he's basically been trying to do that ever since. And we know that while he preferred Trump getting in office, one of his primary goals in the last election was really to get Americans to hate each other and to start fighting with each other. He was also actually helping the Hillary campaign a lot less, but he had some eggs in every basket. And that's what we talked about before too. If Hillary had won, he already was working on her. So he was working on everybody. Oh yeah. So how much I
think I mentioned to you, the Russians are the great masters of chess, and they play the long game in everything. So I guarantee you, they had every base covered.
So, and one of the things we've been looking at, and we still haven't, I keep saying we've been working on a show where we're trying to get into Russian oligarchs and where they have been investing in things like, say, aluminum in Mitch McConnell's backyard, which was interesting. I know, it's a shock. And Mitch McConnell actually passed the law that would let oligarchs who had sanctions on them invest in aluminum companies in his backyard because jobs. Yep.
Because Mitch.
Well, yeah, exactly. So, and then you look at Maria whatever her name was, NRA, had basically part of the, quote, NRA in Russia, and then infiltrates the NRA in the U.S., gets close to everybody, Russian agent. And how responsible, well, how much of this is where we are today is on some level Russian interference and or design in your view?
I would guess, and I've got nothing to back this up, but this is just my opinion. I would say somewhere in the vicinity of 35 to 40% of the problems we're facing internally are problems that have been facilitated by, if not outright caused by, Russian influence.
And they had that, I forget the name of the farm. I'm going to have to go over the records. Like I said, we're prepping a show on this, and they had a farm that was basically just deliberately sending out, quote, fake news, bad information, but it was designed deliberately to inflame both the left and the right against each other.
Yes.
Oh, well, it's I learn a lot when you're on, but I always get depressed too. So
life is always worse than you think it is.
Well, and that's where my optimism comes in about the cynicism. That's where exactly. So my optimism is like, see, you were right to be a cynic. Oh dear Lord. Okay. Well, so that brings us back to the head of counterintelligence at the Justice Department signing off on making that warrant public. And the fact that he apparently had the SIOP documents at Mar-a-Lago, which I will tell you, I get a little frustrated, as it is, with the, oh, well, he's an idiot defense, because even though that is true, I don't think he didn't know what he was doing. I think he knew what he was doing. But even if he didn't, there's
people on the payroll that are smart enough to... The thing to me that was the giveaway is that his lawyers were informed beforehand, not far beforehand, but before the search warrant was served. They were given the warrants, which said very specifically what they were looking for. So they knew they were coming. They knew the reason they were coming. They knew what they were looking for specifically. Garland is the one who released that information. And he only did so because the right had been putting out information that was obviously, and proven now, a complete bullshit lie. So at any time, the Trump organization could have come out and said, here's the documents they gave us, and we had nothing of this sort in the, the whole argument that, oh, they just grabbed things and they didn't have a list, they just grabbed whatever they wanted. No, here's the list. You had the list. You could tell us how does that list of what they were looking for differ from the list that they signed off on with your lawyer present validating and verifying that's what they took. How does it differ? It doesn't. So all the stuff you're putting out is, as usual, a complete fabricated lie. It's designed to spin up the base. It's designed to encourage whack job right-wingers to go shoot at the FBI office somewhere. That's what's going on. So, that one side's trying to play an above-the-board game, and the other side couldn't tell you whether, the sun was out or it was dark without you having to doubt what they just said. It goes back to what you were saying about, the Russian lady in the line. They've gotten so accustomed to lying about everything that I don't think they have any clue what truth and falsehood is anymore. To them, truth is whatever they say it is, and falsehood is anything that anybody else says.
I have a very difficult time with that mindset, but I have met people, I've had people in my life that have that, and there are degrees to it. And I've had people for extended periods in my life who could tell the difference between a truth and a lie, in that technically they knew there was a difference and they knew that the truth would be that which comported with reality, but they could see no functional difference between the two and no value in one over the other. Whatever you said that got you to whatever your goal was the truth. That's the truth. And I've also seen people who actually couldn't even go that far. They couldn't actually distinguish. But it's weird when you get on the spectrum of, and I think for some people they're born that way and it's a disorder. Others just kind of learn it. And I don't know whether it's Trump or not, but it's a.
I don't remember what show or movie it was from, but there's that famous quip of, "I reject your reality and substitute one of my own." That's today's Republican Party.
Yeah.
I mean, in a nutshell, that's everything that they stand for.
So now we had been talking about this, and we've been workshopping on the Discord a bit about where this came from. Did it come from his former chief of staff? Did he flip? Has someone else flipped? And we know somebody saw these documents. And the way we know that is because, A, they knew exactly what they were looking for and they knew they were there.
And where they were.
And they knew where they were. They knew where the safe was. I also noted that they could have, if this had been, a lot of times, and this is the old boys club or the gentleman's club, a lot of times if for some reason they're going to have to issue the warrant, but they don't want to, they'll call you up and they'll say, "Listen, we got to go in. What's the combo to your safe? Tell us just so that we don't have to, we'll clean everything up when we go." Well, yada, yada, yada. He wasn't given personally a heads up. I don't know if his lawyers told him or not. It sounds like they didn't. Who knows? But this was hostile. This was just like, we're showing up when you're not there, and we're going to do whatever the hell we want. And I was sort of sitting there saying, okay, why that far? And I think we've got some idea into it. But so they knew where the documents were. They knew roughly what the documents were. So how'd they find out, do you think?
I think some member of his, I don't want to say staff, but it could be staff, could be entourage, if you will, including Secret Service. He still has some degree of Secret Service protection. I think somebody saw something that alarmed them, that terrified them. And a call was made. And that, based on that call, it was confirmation. I suspect the Department of Justice already knew to some extent that there were things like this that were going on, but not to that level of detail. And when they found out the level of detail, it was like, we need to act immediately, and we need to act dramatically and forcefully to make sure that this is not hidden. This is major, not just national security, but literally national survival at stake. And you can be a Trump loyalist, but when you see that he's got documents that he has no need for, shouldn't have, and perhaps even you're aware that he's been negotiating with somebody, even a loyalist is going to say, yeah, something needs to be done. There's beyond the pale, and then there's what the hell.
Yeah.
By the way, just stupid question. Do you know where that expression "beyond the pale" comes from?
Okay, do I know? I'm a big fan of knowing where these expressions come from, because I love languages, obviously.
Sure.
I don't know that one. Beyond the pale. I have no idea.
So the Pale was a small area around Dublin, controlled by the English. It was the civilized portion, and this is in the Middle Ages. It was the civilized portion of Ireland. And anything outside the safe and civilized confines of the Pale was beyond the pale. That's where the expression comes from.
I've got it. I love it. I love it. I love it. My wife is going to get you for that, but I love it. Well, because I know so many of those, and my wife reached the point where she thinks I'm making them up, because I more often than not, I know where an expression comes from. She's like, there's no, this is the weirdest expression. I was like, actually comes from here. And she's like, I think you're lying. I was like, no, it doesn't. And so now I've got another one. This is great. Next time someone says beyond the pale, hon, I know where, shut up. So thank you. I owe you for that. Well, that was another reason actually too, because I think you and I share a lot of similar interests, and so that was another reason why I was really glad you could come on for this and do this. I'll tell you, and we'll probably start wrapping up in a little bit, but I'm having a delightful time. But this is one I have a very few number of rules that are just sort of, I try to use as guiding. I'm not a deontologist, but any form of ethical system usually in and of itself is, I lean more towards utilitarianism, but that doesn't always work, and sometimes consequentialism needs to be used. So take a little, ethics like a nice what is it, like a cake, take a recipe, a little advice from here and there, but because my father was a lawyer, and I talk about legal principles all the time, and there's some that I really stand by, including, privileged information. I'm a little ambivalent about what happened with Alex Jones, because I'm sitting there going, like, if that was privileged information, absolutely it shouldn't be released. Having said that, all of it was subject to discovery beforehand, and we should just air that moment, because that's Legal Eagle did a great.
I know it's such a watching somebody destroy their lives on film in the moment. It just, you gotta just admire the sheer stupidity.
That was a moment. Now, since it was all subject to discovery, okay, that would be one thing. But I've when I argue ethics, I taught mock trial, so I start with students too, and one of the first things you try to ingrain in them is that they are not a judge. Everyone always says, well, how can you work for someone you know is guilty? And the real throwaway excuse, which is complete horseshit, is, well, you never know, right? You never know. Now, you figure it out pretty quick. If you've been around, you can tell, when somebody says, well, there's no proof I did that. It's like, okay, you're guilty. The way I know you're guilty is because an innocent person says, I didn't do it. They don't care what the evidence says. They say I didn't do it. The guilty person says, well, you don't have any proof. Okay, so we know you did it. But it's not the job of the lawyer to do that. The job of the lawyer is to put on the best defense possible, because if the prosecution isn't held to account, that's how innocent people start getting fried.
Yeah, but you're assuming you're dealing with competent lawyers.
Yes. The number of assumptions I just made
and cost of the lawyer does not equate to competence. That's the second part of that corollary.
Yeah. So when teaching law, one of the first things I start with is it's none of your business whether they're guilty or not. It's none of your business. And it sounds like it should be, because it's like you're defending the guy, but it's like, no, it's the business of the jury. That's whose business it is. And the second you say, well, I'm gonna, you always find when you're teaching high school kids, they're always like, well, I'd find a way to make sure the DA got this piece of evidence. And I was just like, okay, so you're deciding that because you think he's guilty, you're going to sabotage the case. Well, yeah, but I know he's got, that's not the, what's your role here and why? And when I used to do just like unofficial translation work at like summer camps and stuff like that, I spoke Russian, Japanese, Spanish, I'd translate in all those, and that, a lot of great stories there, but I talk too much already. And so I sort of learned this appreciation for the translator is really supposed to be invisible. A translator is not even a person, really, in terms of, the translator is speaking for somebody else. And when it comes to heads of state, if they cannot trust their translator, they cannot do business. If you can't trust your security guards, you can't do business. So I actually, when they wanted to subpoena Trump's translator, when it was just him, his translator, and Putin in a room, and even I was saying, I think he is committing sedition in that room, and I think he's guilty of treason. And I came out and I said that, but I also said you can't subpoena the
translator.
The translator. I said the reason is because then he's got a real easy solution going forward. Don't bring the translator in ever again. But now nobody can bring a translator into that room, and you've completely undermined our ability to operate and I certainly don't want Trump trying to speak Russian. So I get a little fanatical.
Or rely on Putin's translator for it.
Yeah. So I get fanatical about those positions, and one of the positions is that your security detail doesn't talk about anything you do to anybody, because we have presidents who have affairs, and if they think their detail's going to rat them out, and we have presidents who do illegal things, and if they think that Secret Service is going to rat them out, and we have Secret Service who sees something and may think it's illegal, and so it's sort of like, okay, you just divorce yourself from that. Whether he's doing something legal or illegal is somebody else's business. Your business is keeping him alive. That's it.
Now, but here's an interesting aside from that.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is true, and I've never researched it, but it's something to look into.
Mm-hmm.
I have heard that Trump was the only sitting U.S. president who maintained a private security detail while he was in office.
Really?
In addition to Secret Service, he had his own private security people with him. And by coincidence, guess who those people were provided by and recruited by? Erik Prince.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to be a little careful because
𝗍𝗲𝐻 brother.
All of a sudden, it all starts sounding like conspiracy theories. But first of all, you can look all this up, and these are all facts. And second of all, unfortunately, this is how most of this shit ends up working. So if it turns out, if it really turns out that it's the Secret Service, and I glanced at the live chat, and a number of people jumped in and said, yeah, I think it was the Secret Service. So a Secret Service agent is sitting there and watching Trump because he's got Secret Service detail for life now. That's one of the perks of the job. You leave, you got Secret Service for life. And he's so used to it by now. And he's used to the fact that they keep their mouths shut because they can't do their jobs without it. So he's just like, yeah, I got these nuclear documents here. And he's probably telling somebody because he's not dragging those out.
Well, he loves to brag about shit to prove how manly he is.
Yeah. So if he had just taken those documents and kept them in his safe and never took them out, nobody's going to know. But he's taking them out. He's showing them to people. Again, what possible reasons for? We already have speculated on that. So, but and then somebody sees it.
This goes right back to the whole question you asked about why is he so deferential to and in awe of Putin? He loves and respects strength because he's such a weak man himself. And, it falls into the whole category of why would he show anybody that he has these highly sensitive, super classified documents? Because he thinks it makes him look powerful and big and important. He's so freaking insecure because, honestly, it's daddy never loved me. He was sent off to boarding school at 8? And he'd see his parents once or twice a year. Never got anything from daddy that didn't come with strings attached. I think that's a lot of what's going on. I think we're dealing with a damaged individual from his childhood who managed to somehow rise above, if you will, all those issues and become the, quote, most powerful man on the planet. And he's still freaking insecure.
Well, you heard about the Medal of Honor, I assume.
Oh, yes. He'd rush into a burning building to rescue those children.
Well, and he turned off the lights, which was the biggie. So for those of you who haven't, if you're new, we covered this. I got a little triggered by this because the Congressional Medal of Honor can only be given to servicemen. And he genuinely apparently tried to give it to himself and was joking about that, but it looks like it really happened. And the grounds for that was that he was on Air Force One when it landed at Baghdad. and he had been told that they had to dim the lights, and then he dims the lights, and he literally went up to the captain of Air Force One and said, "Didn't I do a good job? I dimmed those. I wasn't even sure you were going to make it there for a minute, but I did a good job, didn't I?" And for which, by the way, he deserves a Medal of Honor. And then he got told,
25 to 30% of our population think of him as the second coming of Christ.
That
speaks more to the reason the country's failing than him.
That's a really good point. I have a buddy of mine who does that. I have a buddy of mine who I've been talking to her, and I was like, "So, this and this about Trump." She goes, "I don't give a fuck about Trump." I was like, "How can anyone say that? How can anyone say that?" She goes, "Don't you understand? I give a fuck about the fact we live in a country where this could happen." She goes, "He's the symptom. He's not the problem." And I was just like, "Okay, yeah, mind blown. I have only so many things I can put on my plate at a time." Yeah. Oh,
now. I know we're running late, and I don't want to keep you longer than you need to be, so we can shut up and listen to it next week. But my father keeps asking me the question of how could this happen? And it's a difficult question, and there are a lot of different opinions of how you could have something like this happen. And I think, that may be something you and I should talk about next time, is how did we end up where we are?
I would like to do a deep dive into that. And I'm actually okay on time. If I was going to put like a hard limit, I'd say I've got easily another hour. I just want to make sure you're not fading, by the way. So usually, I'm trying to pay attention to the guests, and I don't want them to start fading. You're not fading, but I was just like, I didn't want to necessarily push it past. So hey, I'm good on time. I'm probably going to start fading about a half hour, 45 minutes. So you get kids, you got oh God. "Hon, could you get up at 8 in the morning and go take them to camp?" I was like, "Well, I could, but I normally go to bed at 4 in the morning, so I'm not going to be a pleasant fellow. As long as you understand that, I could do it."
Shut up! Sit down and eat. Drink your apple juice.
Yeah. Oh, well, and we finally caved. She's getting the cinnamon toast sticks for breakfast, so she gets the cinnamon toast sticks, and you get them in the freezer aisle. They are like French toast covered in cinnamon and sugar.
Yeah.
And she tries to get the doubles. We're good parents, so we say no. Yeah, and that's exactly. So this morning, she's had like 3 or 4 of those for breakfast, and she's like, "Hey, can I have some candy? I had all my breakfast, and it was really healthy." She's like, "Candy after cinnamon toast."
Here, have some coffee. I'll put some sugar in it for you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, listen, if they're heading over to my sister's and I'm ticked off at my sister for something, I might. Does she watch the stream? Let's hope she's not watching this one. She'll get me for that one. But yeah. Oh, dear Lord. So. I've been a little worried because, and this was so we were watching the events of the last 3 or 4 days unfold, and this is something that I've been interested in. I don't talk about it too much on air. Every now and then I talk about it. I'm interested in areas of tension, and this would be art versus commerce is a good one. In news, it's speed, which everybody wants their news now. They would be willing to sacrifice some accuracy to be the first, so they can tell all their friends, "Did you see this? Did you hear this?" We all do it. We all want to do it. So speed is really important, but accuracy. And there's a tension between those two, because the faster you go, you're going to lose accuracy. That's just it. You're on YouTube. You're trying to get subs. So it's sort of like drama versus having a show that, maybe is drier, but is either educational or it's got your vitamins, whatever. Sugar versus the banana. But
Sure.
So we were covering in the Discord. So on the Discord, we'll talk about what's going on throughout the day if there's anything big, and we sit and usually not on the front end of the Discord, but in the back end in the production rooms, we'll sit there and say, okay, look, are we thinking about going live with this? What are we seeing? What's going on? And we'll talk to people and we'll try to figure it out. And there's this lunatic shooting at the FBI building. And I'm of two minds of this. I love the breaking news. Those are oftentimes my favorite shows. And the reason is because they're so hard. That's why. It's because I have to sit here. I have to bring in all of these materials. I have to get them into the show. I'm talking to 6 different people. People are bringing in this information. We're collating it. And it's great because there's so few times in life that you do something that really takes like the vast majority of your skills simultaneously. I got to present well, but I got to collate the information. I got to make judgment calls about what's credible and who's lying and who's telling the truth. And we're doing all of this live. I love it. I love it. It's some of my favorite shows. And you know what? Great ratings. A lot of people, like to see those shows for obvious reasons. So yeah, sure. Yeah. It's like if there's a chance to go live, like somebody's shooting like, welcome to In Time. Somebody is trying to take out the FBI. Join us in 5 minutes. And it's like, da-da-da. But it's also like, okay, this isn't the first lunatic to shoot somebody up, and we know why he's doing it. I don't need I know why he's shooting up the FBI. I knew before we saw his Facebook page. I could have written his Facebook page before we saw it.
Or him.
I could have. I knew what it was going to, and it said exactly what I knew it was going to say. It's, the FBI, we have to free Trump, and this is what we were talking about on January 6th. I was like, okay. Nobody here is shocked. So on that level, it ain't news. But so we're watching this, and it's sort of like So I am fading a little bit because I'm sitting there saying, what was the point of that? It's the tension between wanting to go live and to talk about this shooting and talk about a number of other things today, and wanting to not add fuel to the fire because, as you know, especially with news, all news is local, and that means many things. But we, as a species, we evolved with news as the town crier with a circulation of about 50 feet. And you knew what was going on in your town, but anywhere else it is. So if there's a murder 6 towns away from you, nobody knows it. And then when you hear about a murder, it's local. It's somebody in your town, somebody you knew. Well, now we've got media news. We're bringing all this news straight into people's homes. And you hear a murder happened in Florida, and you're locking your...
I was wondering how long it would take.
Yeah, well, it's an indication to me I got to check my rants a little bit. I'm just going, and you're sitting there. There's a pool going on in the audience. How long before Nick notices? And I'm not going to ask the question because there's no good answer to this either. Either you made that while I was talking, which means that was a really long rant, or it was already next to your desk, and that's not a better answer. I don't want to know why you got the tinfoil hat next to your desk.
No, I asked my wife to grab it. We had friends over, and we were having one of our usual political discussions, and somebody jokingly went into the kitchen and made himself a tinfoil. I said, I don't want to listen to any more of your damn conspiracy theories.
So long story short, way too late for that. Everybody's on edge. I'm on edge. We're all worried about this shit. And so I sit there and say, part of me wants to just go, somebody's shooting at the FBI building and let's cover it. But we don't have footage. We're not covering. And shit like this does happen in the U.S. from time to time. And even though we know how and why, it's like, so we're all thinking that something's going to pop off. And you and I have talked about that. We talked about that on air. What do you think the next couple of days or weeks looks like at this point? I know a huge part of it's going to hinge on what's in that fucking warrant, but I mean, this is it's.
I think at this point we're still gathering information. His loyalists can see the writing on the wall and know where we're headed, but it hasn't happened yet, and they're hoping that, the divine hand of Newt Gingrich will come down and save the world or something. I think if and when charges are finally preferred, that's when things may boil over. I think if we do go to trial and a guilty verdict comes out, I think it's almost a guarantee that the true wingnuts are going to, pop the cork.
How are you feeling? You've studied much more history than I have, and you've seen the fall of civilizations. And we've talked about what that may look like for the United States. And we as a country will, or as several countries, or however it pans out, will find a way to get through it, and people survive and endure. But are you looking at this through the lens of history? How do you feel about our future? Do you feel like we'll find a way through
our little experiment with democracy?
Yeah, yes, among other things, but just I mean, in general, is what do you look at as you see the future and for generations that are coming up right now?
This is not an unprecedented kind of affair for this country. This has happened before. We had McCarthyism in the 50s. We had the panic before FDR came in and saved the country with the New Deal. And, the Republicans were seriously talking about, basically declaring national military law, martial law across the country because there were so many problems. I mean, I've got pictures in my father's high school yearbook of the intersection in downtown Tacoma, Washington, in front of the post office, and there are U.S. Army machine gun posts in sandbags with, troops in battle dress with helmets on, because everybody was so convinced there was going to be mass rioting in the attempt to declare, some sort of communist state. And you have the Civil War. We've had these kind of events pop up before. Historically, there's a change in direction, and things correct themselves to some degree. And it's a case of 3 steps forward, 2 steps back throughout our history. We're in the midst of 2 steps back right now, arguably. I don't think the current administration is starting us to move forward that 3 steps. I think that will come later. I think we're still dealing with fallout from 2 steps back. But every time this happens, there's always a risk that the correction won't happen. And all it takes is, the right spark at the right moment to change everything. And I'm guilty of this myself, but you hear, calls from different sides of the fence. We need a revolution to fix the broken country and everything. The problem with any revolution is you don't know what the result is going to be. And all you have to do is look at the French Revolution. It started out with the best of intentions, and how long did it take before Madame Guillotine was lopping heads off in the town square?
No.
And there was no logic to who they were beheading. I mean, it would have been one thing if it was, we're killing all the nobility. But it wasn't. It was, I don't like him because he charges too much for pants. Nonsense like that. And that's what happens anytime you use violence to solve the problem. The problem that we're facing right now is that so many people see no possible means out of the current crisis short of violence. And that's what's needed, is somebody to stand up and say, there is a way out that doesn't involve having to, storm the Capitol building or blow up the abortion clinic or what have you, or riot in the streets and smash storefronts. There are ways to address these problems that we can universally agree on. The trouble is, I think what's holding us back from finding that middle path to save us is that there are too many people that have a vested interest in ensuring that the chaos and the crisis continue.
We haven't seen that in the past?
I don't think so, not to this level. I mean, yeah, you get, the famous case of the group of millionaires who were trying to convince Smedley Butler to lead the revolution and overthrow the government and everything, and he betrayed them properly. But they're not trying to change the system. They're just trying to put themselves in charge. And I think that's the key right now, is there are people who want to perpetuate the crisis, perpetuate the divisions, perpetuate the discord. Interesting, we should use that word when, we pair it up with a Discord page, but discord with the original meaning of said word. They find that it benefits them because you can pander fear to people a lot easier than you can pander forgiveness. You can you can get people to say it's easier to shoot the person I don't dislike than it is to go and talk to them and rationally get them to see that there is a middle ground that may not make them entirely happy, but certainly won't make me entirely happy either, but at least both of our concerns are addressed. And right now, I don't see a way out of the mess without fixing that. And I think it's the three-way combination. I think we have to address wealth disparity. I think number two, we need to do something about the way journalism, or what it has evolved into, is handled in this country. We used to have the fairness doctrine. That's disappeared. And so it sells advertising with your various groups to pander lies, and we need to make that go away. And the third thing is we need to find some way to get past the obstructionist mindset that both parties, let's be honest here, both parties evidence in Congress, and start going back to finding compromises to solve real problems.
U.S. Constitution. We always talk about it, and we've been, especially now, compromise has been a thing of weakness. But in the U.S. Constitution, every paragraph, every clause, every sentence, every word, every piece of punctuation has one thing in common. They were all a compromise. So we have exactly. two super chats, and I want to ask you a question because you said something that I've been thinking about, and I do want to ask you a question. Sure. But the Sinister Porpoise, $2. This was a while back. Firewall Russia, Porpoise for High Chief Technocrat. Thank you, Porpoise, okay, for your continued support. We really appreciate it, and also $2 from Discovering Ancient History with Pat Lewinsky.
Lowinger.
Some guy. I don't know. Seems like a decent enough fellow. I've seen him around.
You're pulling my leg by trying to mispronounce. Okay.
Yeah. Way to improvise there.
Read between the lines.
Pat Lowinger, $2. Be prepared for elements to call for a civil war. Well, there have been some that have been doing it, but you and I, we've had some frank discussions in the past about where we are with that, and we are at certainly historically speaking at pretty much a prime place for it. At least that was my understanding of your position, and you had described it as you didn't see any off ramps, which is kind of how you described it here too. Which
I don't call for it. In fact, I do. I try to say the opposite, but the sad truth is I don't see how it's avoidable. Now, it depends on how you define civil war. Zandring, I think it was even offline, so it isn't recorded anywhere, but Zandring at one point said, no, there won't be a civil war, but there will be insurrectionary movements by angry individuals in small cells. I would contend that's still a civil war. How do you define that? I don't know. We're arguing semantics at that point, but I do think we are going to get an outbreak of semi-organized violence.
So I have the picture of Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King behind me, and there's a whole history to that, and you've already heard it, so I'll avoid it because you'll put on another tin hat, and you'll put on the whole shoulders, and I still won't know, and you'll be sitting there going to do tin armor and all, but what last time we had talked about that, you said something that was interesting that dovetails with something that you just said now, because we'd also been talking about dogs, and you had said that one of the things that you found that actually really works is kindness, dignity, and respect, and that the amount of damage that could be undone with that. And what blew my mind was, and we talked about it, and it was clear you had thought about it, and it was clear you were very comfortable with the principles that I often talk about, and that's not common for a military man. So I was curious about that. How did you? Because you had said here too that you're not interested in avoiding the fighting if at all possible, and that's not that really isn't the solution. And I've heard that sentiment rarely from military and former military. It's still somewhat more common than even the step further that you took. But so, what brought you to that line? Have you always sort of thought that way, or is that something that you learned? Because you understand my because that's just not common in the military.
Sure, I'll put it this way. In the military, you have the luxury of, if an individual is not working out, you simply say, bye-bye, and he goes away. You can't do that in society. The person is there. So you have an inherent desire, a need, I would contend, to bring that person up to a level where they are contributory, that they are working within the societal model to some extent. Because the only other option is that you marginalize them, which creates all sorts of problems, either with violence and illegal activity, but also public health. I mean, look at the millions of homeless people we have in this country right now. I mean, I grew up in countries like India, and homelessness is a way of life almost. There's so many people. You could literally walk the space of one city block and see the entire course of human life from conception to death right there on the sidewalk in one city block. That's how abject the poverty is in that, or was in that country. I suspect it's still largely that way, but it has gotten better. We're starting to devolve into that kind of level now. I mean, do you remember when you were growing up seeing homeless camps like we see in many of the big cities today?
I was privileged enough to grow up in the suburbs, but I'm not going to hazard, because I also am aware of my tendency and the tendency of most people, like, well, back in my day, we didn't have these problems, so I'm not qualified to opine. It didn't seem it to me, no.
Right, exactly, and that's what I'm saying is that if you don't bring people up to a level that they are contributing, or at least a negative sum member of society. In other words, not a drain on society. You're accomplishing nothing. You're making life harder for everybody else. And instead of saying, oh, we're going to invest all this money in more law enforcement and more prisons, why not, invest in social programs where you can get these people off the street, off their substance abuse problems, get them into, some level of housing with a job, give them some way to become a part of society again. And going back to your analogy with the dog, so many people take their personal anger and frustrations out on the dog because I keep telling you, don't piss on the floor, but the dog piddles on the floor. Instead of trying to find an imaginative way around that problem and getting the dog to understand nicely that he's supposed to go piddle outside, what they do is beat the dog. The dog has no ability to connect those two actions. He doesn't understand you're hitting him because he's piddling. All he knows is the person that I depend upon for food and shelter and who sometimes shows me true affection now is beating me for no reason. And it creates a psychosis. And that's kind of where we are with our society today, is we've generated a societal psychosis because we're doing the same thing that a bad pet owner does with our more needy or more marginalized members of society. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. Psychopathology is contagious, which is something that we don't think about, but it absolutely is. And you can see it actually in the Trump administration, right? Where you can take people who probably would, under other normal circumstances, would recognize that these things are a problem, but you steep them in Trumpism long enough, and all of a sudden they're like, "Well, everybody's breaking the. It's what we do," and that's an easy example. But what we found is, in general, and there are exceptions, and there obviously ways have to be found to deal with this, but in general, with the occasional sociopath or psychopath notwithstanding, people who are treated with love tend to try to pass that on to others and use that as a solution to their problems. And people who are treated with anger, hatred, or resentment will pass that on. If you want to look at what is the single most common thing that all abusers have in common. They don't all have this in common, but it is the most common thing, and 90% of them have this in common. They were abused themselves.
Yep.
And
they pass it on to their kids, who pass it on to their. It's a perpetual cycle.
And it's catharsis. I've noticed, if I know that I am getting unusually angry on Twitter, or in any social media, but Twitter tends to be, if I notice I'm spending a lot of time on Twitter too, I'll sit there and go, okay, Twitter's a cesspool. What am I doing there? And what I'll usually find is the people that I'm going after are a lot like I am, and I just had someone go after me for something similar. And I lost an engagement, or I felt like an idiot, so I'm feeling better by going around making other people feel like the same kind of idiot that I was made to look like. And that's staggering to watch myself do that. And I've just sort of, you just sit there and say, yeah, please.
Yeah, but let me interject.
Yeah.
There are a small number of people who are non-redeemable, if you will.
Yes.
True psychotics, people who, no matter how well you treat them, are always going to try to hurt you, or to take from you, or do damage. They're not able to stop it. It's part of who and what they are. And those are people that you need to do something to remove them from infecting others, if you will. That's where prisons may actually have an appropriate place, not as, which is what they're supposed to be according to the literature, places where you reform people, but where you contain people.
Well,
now, we don't do a good job reforming, but that's a separate issue.
Well, and there are countries that do that successfully, but we try to do all of them. So what we've decided our prisons are to sequester terrible people from society. Okay, great. We've also decided that they are to rehabilitate people. Okay, so we're also going to rehabilitate people. They are also punitive. There is something about the fact that they're being punished that balances the scales and create justice. They are also, what's the term I'm looking at? A deterrent. If you know you're going to spend a huge amount of time in prison and suffer, you're not going to do the crime. So that's where Tough on Crime came out, and we're going to start to...
And I would contend you're missing perhaps one of the most important ones.
Please.
It's a social control mechanism used to keep those in power, and those who are subjugated. So...
Yes, that's not one of the official reasons, though. But yes, very true.
White middle-class kid gets caught with a joint, he gets a fine. Black inner city kid gets caught with a joint, he's going to prison for 5 years.
Yep.
And that model absolutely 100% needs to be broken. And the problem there, going back almost full circle to where we started, those three things. You need to break the power of the 1%. We need to start saying everybody gets a larger slice of that pie. You can still be the 1%, but not the level you're at now. Because I'm sure you've seen the graphs. Even the 10% have nothing with compared to what the 1% have.
Greater disparity than at any time in U.S. history, and last I heard it,
I would contend global history.
Yeah, I think that's Actually, it probably has to be, since we're the richest country in the world, and it's and it still isn't enough for the people who the people who actually control these things and are the machinations and the CEOs with the golden parachutes. And I don't want to just pigeonhole and throw out memes, but it's All right. I think that brings us full circle. So thank you so much for coming on. And I look forward to what I kind of suspect, and you had mentioned Crimea and what you have the ability to read air intelligence, which I, as it turns out, do not. So you've already given me some insights into that, but I think my suspicion is we're going to need you back on for a regular show at some point coming up. But at any rate, you are scheduled for part 3 of Off Time next week, same bat time, same bat channel, 9:30 on Thursday. We're going to be tomorrow. We're going to have on, oh my God, we're having everybody tomorrow. 𝗲𝗷𝗲, 𝐓𝐢𝐭𝐴𝐺, Greg, President Sunday, and we're going to talk about the new climate bill and what it does and does not accomplish. There's been a lot of talk about it. There was a lot of talk about it. And then our president's tossing around nuclear documents. I think I probably shouldn't use this analogy anymore because it is an order of magnitude different, but it just reminds me, you remember it was like the 7 or the 12-year-old kid, and he's just like, that's the nuclear football. You know, that's where all the launch codes are held, and there's a Secret Service guy whose job it is, that guy's job is to protect the nuclear football at the cost of the president. Everyone else's, their job is the president. His job is nuclear football at any and all. That's it. If that's taken in somebody else's hands, you'd better be dead. And the president's
don't come home for dinner.
And the president is like, hey kid, you want to see it? He brings the kid up. He's just like, this is how you open it. It's like, you're not even supposed to talk about it.
Not.
Holy
You give me your Mickey Mantle mint card, I'll give you all these.
I'll give you the nuclear codes. And that wasn't at least that wasn't malicious, right? That was just stupid. That was just him being the complete and fucking idiot that he is.
Him being him.
Yeah, I mean, this is. I can't even use that as because I was joking about it earlier. I was like, this is something different. So I am curious to see if the New York Times doesn't put this on full blast, front page tomorrow. It's a liberal paper. This is what I'd like. I'm curious to see what they say. But for those of you who haven't seen the overtime that we just did, or haven't watched the show from the beginning. And don't know, and I haven't seen mainstream news, so I don't know how much they've been covering it. But yeah, he had nuclear documents at Mar-a-Lago classified the highest.
I'm less interested in seeing what the New York Times has than I am in seeing what the New York Post has.
Well, the Post, and this is the thing. Okay, so the Post and Fox News are owned by the same company. It's Murdoch, and Murdoch has. We know that the whole family has not been very pleased with Trump in general. They don't like him personally, but we also know that they're opportunists and they will do whatever it takes. And they've almost said as much. If he's doing well, they're going to support. I'm curious to see at what point. And the Post has been taking serious shots at him. The Post has been going after Trump, so that's good. I don't know about Fox News. Here's just a real random one. Any guesses as to why Tucker Carlson is? What was the phrase? It wasn't scared shitless. It was even worse. But apparently something Alex Jones. I've been sort of asking around to see if anybody's been paying attention. Usually when people are paying attention, somebody can come up with and say, "I'll bet you this, or this is on the phone." But Daily Beast, Tucker Carlson, quote, shitting himself, scared that Alex Jones texts may leak. Now he canceled his regularly scheduled show. There was a leak at Fox.
Who do you think he was trying to coordinate some of the "let's rile up the base" nonsense with?
Well, I'm thinking it's that, but he seems scared enough, and these people are in so much denial over what they've been doing.
Oh, yeah.
It's weird that he's worried.
Yeah, I think it's partially because when you see the orange shit gibbon now being actively brought down, and you're Carlson with all the crap that you've done, how far do you have to go to think I'm next?
Well, and that's the biggest for me. You take down Alex Jones, you take down Carlson. It's not so much about the damage they do, which is really extensive, but it's also about the other people who are lining up to take their place, who now hopefully have pause before going that far off the deep end, because the damage is we're swimming in it.
Well, yeah, and one of my fears is that when we see the current crop of right-wing wingnuts removed through whatever means, the next crop, and there will be a next crop, they will arise. It's not something we can ever stomp out. Are they going to be the smart ones? Are they going to be the ones to figure out, here's where everything was done wrong? We can fix all those mistakes and make sure that when we try the same bullshit on our own, it'll work this time. It'll succeed.
Zandering first made that comment to me when he and I were covering the kidnappings of the protesters in Portland, where the mom van would come up, just yank somebody, and they in military police officers in military secret court, no record that they were ever in front of a judge, the whole 9 yards. And Zandering had first made that point. And it's one I don't intuit, but so I'm intellectually aware of it. But he brings that up all the time. He's like, the problem isn't Trump. The problem is what there is somebody right now on the right saying, "Ooh, he almost got away with it. This is what he got wrong, and if I don't make those mistakes, I can do it."
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the colossal level of bumbling stupidity that was evidenced throughout the 4 years of that poltroon being in power. You don't even have to be, the Svengali, brilliant manipulator, Machiavellian. You just have to be mildly competent. And you're miles beyond where he is or was.
The other thing, as Andring has said, which is interesting because he's pro Second Amendment and I'm against it, but he had said something. I think he's the one who said it. My brain is definitely turning to mush. So if he didn't, it can be a correction. But I think he had said this, which was, okay, we've got guns, but the fascists that want to take over know that everyone in America is armed, so they'll just find another way to do it. And it's not going to be with guns. It's not going to be with the military. It's going to be with a disinformation campaign. It's going to be with any number of... Yeah. So in truth, how well we're actually armed against our government just means they'll find another way to install a fascist regime. They don't have to. And indeed, Hitler, what he did, people sit there and say, well, if the ghettos had been armed, or if the Jews had been armed, there wouldn't have been ghettos. And that may or may not have been true. But he came to power without using any weapons, and he certainly was able to implement what. And by the time anybody realized...
Armed civilians won't hold up against an organized military. All you have to do is look at, the Warsaw Ghetto, the Paris Commune, any of those times when you have armed civilians rise up and try to hold off an organized military. It never ends well for them.
Well, okay, the only thing I'm going to...
And arguably, if you look at us, we were losing until the French and Spanish came in and bailed us out. And what did they bring? An organized military.
That's a really good point. Although, okay, so why is Afghanistan and Vietnam the exception?
Because when we went in, we didn't understand what we were doing. We didn't have a clear mission. You can't just go in and say, "Oh, we're going to make everything hunky-dory." Seriously, that's about the level of strategy that we went into Afghanistan with.
Okay. So mission objective can't be make everything hunky-dory. Okay, Bush could have used. I remember that. We have a plan. What's the plan? Make everything hunky-dory. But okay, please.
But I mean, seriously, okay, we're going to bring down Saddam's regime. Great. You succeeded in what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Super. Now what? What? Democracy didn't just spring up of its own accord? Now what do we do? Oh, shit. And when you don't have a strategy, you're going to fail. We never had a strategy for either of those places. We got into Afghanistan because we wanted to take out Osama. And we were convinced that he was hiding in Afghanistan. And the Taliban had sheltered him, so we wanted to bring down the Taliban. Okay, so we do that. Now what? Oh, we're going to bring in this government that's going to make everything hunky-dory. And how is that going to happen? Because you haven't really looked at the fact that there is no central government in Afghanistan. There never has been a central government in Afghanistan. It's all tribal and regional warlords. So unless you're going to pull your head out of your ass and create an actual functional centralized state, you're doomed. Sorry.
That was one of our better shows. We had on a historian. Well, this wasn't his field, but he still really, he blew me away with how much he knew. It was Pat Lewinsky.
That guy.
That guy came on and had said really very much the same thing. He's like, we didn't understand that these are tribal communities. They hold grudges for generations. And it's tribe and tribe. There's no way to make a central government in that. And if we had understood that, maybe we would have been able to come up with a solution. But instead, we're like, we're going to give you democracy. And isn't that enough that you can? It's like they can't.
I'll relate it to a very specific case that I was involved in. I was there when we first went into Somalia.
Mm-hmm.
I was the XO of the ship that put the first U.S. troops into Somalia.
Mm.
And the ostensible reason we were going in was to alleviate a famine. all these poor, starving Africans that were showing up on the evening news. We're going to go help them. What great guys we are. And so we get in there, we secure the port of Mogadishu, and they open the warehouses. And guess what? You know what the warehouses were filled with? Floor to ceiling, overflowing grain.
Grain.
It wasn't that there wasn't food in the country to feed all those starving people. It was that the political chaos was so bad that there was no way to get the food distributed because the warlords were holding it as a power brokering mechanism. I'll feed your tribe if you declare loyalty to me. So unless you have a realistic mission goal, in other words, we want to create a viable, functional, centralized government and get rid of all these tribal allegiances, what's the point of going in?
Is nation building possible?
I think it can be. I would argue that what we did in Japan and Germany after World War II was nation building. I mean, if you want to look at two countries that were more broken than you can possibly imagine, those are two countries that are a perfect example. And look where they are today. Two of the strongest democracies in the world. But it takes a fundamental understanding of what you're trying to do, and it takes the will to go for the long haul, and it takes a willingness to invest the capital, both physical and human, in bringing that goal to fruition. And I don't think when we went into Vietnam or Afghanistan or Iraq, we had any of those in place. We just had the vague, nebulous notion of hunky-dory, hunky-dory. That's our battle cry, hunky-dory.
Hunky-dory.
Yeah.
that's oh. Okay. And I know I said we were done, but now you got me going. Starship Troopers. I had a brother-in-law in the Marine Corps, and he was talking about Starship Troopers, and he said, look, this was actually a very important book about military. And in that book, there was can I just get a sound check from you for a second? Could you just say something, anything? Say hunky-dory.
Bang, bang.
Thank you.
Hunky-dory.
There is some kind of audio issue where when you're quiet, every now and then a weird clicking noise comes over, and it happens. It used to only happen with a Zandring. Now it's happened with a couple other guests, and all you have to do is make any sound, and it cuts it out. But otherwise, it just drowns out everything. So just ask for a sound check.
I'll breathe heavily while I'm waiting.
Please don't do that. Oh dear Lord. Okay. Welcome, my children. My name is Nicholas Flytrap, and this is In Time After Dark with Lance McMillan. Yeah, wow. Okay, yeah, this show should have ended like 20 minutes ago. So the proposal there, and it's been proposed before, but I remember it mostly because Starship Troopers, as it turns out, was supposed to be this great military treatise. But that you shouldn't be allowed to vote unless you served time in the military. The thinking behind that was that you wouldn't get people like, especially Dick Cheney. Bush was just ignorant. Bush really just sort of thought the military was his toy. Dick Cheney was a level beyond that, which was they were a tool for him to use as part of his commercial and business
personal
empire.
Enrichment scheme.
Yeah, so he took it a step further. How do you prevent leaders like that, who ostensibly are what got us into Afghanistan in a way that we couldn't extricate ourselves, and Vietnam, people who said, it's going to be easy, we're in charge of the biggest war machine ever, and who have absolutely no understanding, and they go and with this Dunning-Kruger, the flag of Dunning-Kruger, say, we're going to do this?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying the first giveaway that it's a flawed concept is the fact that Heinlein himself, in later years openly stated that what he was trying to sell with that book was totally wrong. He did not agree with it, and it was broken. Yes.
I hadn't heard that. Okay, good.
Right. Number two, I have an issue with a democracy is supposedly all about giving everybody a voice, and that we try to look out for the less fortunate and the vulnerable within our society. If you can't do military service because you're disadvantaged in one way or another, does that mean that you aren't entitled to have a say in how the country is run? So we're basically creating a whole elite set of, these people serve, so they get a vote. You don't get a vote. You didn't serve. Oh, and these guys were special forces, so they get 2 or 3 votes. This guy was a general. He get 10 votes. You see what I'm getting at? This whole idea of this hierarchy of I'm better than you because I did X militarily. I've also heard the argument that, well, let's stand Heinlein's position on its head, which is that instead of you have to have had military service to vote, it's that you have to have had military service in order to hold public office. The argument there is that if you're doing that, so many people who naturally gravitate, especially if you're dealing with a volunteer force, who gravitate towards military careers or service in the military, tend to be conservative, then you're going to end up with kind of you can vote for whichever member of the Communist Party you would like to vote for.
Yeah. If there's no choice in the vote, it's not a vote, so it's the same problem, just from the other. Yeah,
and I will agree that the system is flawed. The problem is nobody has yet come up with an alternate system that doesn't have even worse flaws. And that's why I keep saying this is the great experiment with democracy. It is an experiment. We're hoping and keep praying that it's going to continue and it will be able to make it better. Because it is flawed, and we have to find ways to control those flaws.
I think it was Churchill who had said it, democracy is the worst form of government, except for every other form of government. But he also said the best argument against democracy is 10 minutes talking with the average voter.
Well, the other one I love about that is attributed to Churchill is that if my son goes to college and does not become a communist while he is there, I will doubt his intelligence. If he is still a communist after he graduates, I will know he is insane.
And I think it's also attributed, now is he with the one, I think it's along those lines, if you're not a liberal when you're young, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative when you're older, you have no brain. I don't know. I think that was attributed to all sorts of people.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again. We'll have you back next week if we don't have a disaster in the meantime. So I'll see you tomorrow. And in the meantime, we've had a lot of people supporting us for the show. And if you like the show, you know what? You can always super chat. You can always become a patron. But the other thing you can do, like, subscribe. And if you think we had a good conversation here or there was a piece of it you liked, send it to a friend. You know, we're not asking you to shill things you don't believe in. If you like the show, pass it along. That's always a big help to us. So hope to see some of you guys in the Discord. We had you trolling our last conversation. What's the name you were using? Was it you or was it actually I thought it was you in the overtime. I saw somebody that Lance Madman or Lance was that you?
That's my handle on there. I don't disguise it. It's me. It's just, the obvious ones that say Lance something have all been taken, so I had to come up with some variation.
So you'll find Lance causing trouble there and on YouTube and a bunch of other people. Come check us out. And thank you, Lance, once again. It was it's always a genuine pleasure to talk with you. So thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Nick. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon. Hello, all. Thank you all for joining us. It's rare that I cut into the credits, but I am doing that now because I was talking to Lance, and I try to ask before the end of every show, are you going to join us in the Discord? And I know a lot of people want to talk to Lance. I also know we're down to like 7 viewers, so we lost most people. They don't go all the way through the credits. But if you are still listening to the show, and if you're interested, Lance will be in the Discord to chat. Had I been on my ball game, I would have asked him before we went to credits. But so he is going to be in the let's just do the voice lounge. So he'll be in the voice lounge shortly after the show. So anyone who wants to have a chat with Lance and decided to stay through the credits, we've just pulled a Marvel. This is the post-credits scene. Lance will be in there, and I'm gonna go join too, because if he's gonna be in there, I'm gonna hang, and then I'm gonna bail. But thank you all, those of you who have stayed through the credits. Come hang with Lance and I in the voice lounge. Chat will be in there in a minute or two. Thank you.